All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we get into great theories, concepts, and discoveries that you might not be familiar with because they've been suppressed. And this is a segment that we have called the Bible Decode. I think this is number 472 and possibly 3. And these are things that your priest, pastor, rabbi, minister doesn't want you to know about. We've been concentrating mainly on the New Testament and in particular the Roman origins hypothesis. That is that the New Testament was actually written by the Roman Caesars of the Flavian dynasty and that it is a fraud. It was a psychological operation written by the Romans. And if you were objective about this, you would say, of course it was. Because I've done digging on psyops, false flags, hoaxes, and it turns out that everything that I believe in is false. Everything that I believe in turned out to be a misdirection, psychological operation, spectacle, hoax, false flag, and the like. And so why wouldn't this thing be also? Um, but for some reason, most of the truthers and anons and diggers, I won't even say most, I will say all that I have encountered, I haven't encountered one in 10 years who has questioned Christianity to that point, even though there are like a dozen books out there on this topic. Um, and so that's why I focus on that for these videos and target it toward the Patriot community because the Patriot community is going to fail ultimately unless it changes its belief systems. And I'm not any type of atheist. Uh, you know, uh, the God part is, the higher power, the higher intelligence, the creator, the universe, the all, whatever you want to call it. Um, I'm all in favor. But the New Testament and the Jesus Christ part is not real. And you can, you know, yell and scream and affirm and say Jesus is Lord a million times. It doesn't make it. It doesn't make it so. Um, and it actually makes you sound foolish, especially when you start saying that if you don't believe it, you are uh, the Antichrist or you are possessed by Satan. You can't question this is exactly what it says in the New Testament. Jesus, you have to have faith. Um, no, well, you only have to have faith if you don't believe in the truth. Um, faith is really for you when you don't have any evidence. But unfortunately, there's a ton of evidence against the existence of Jesus. And ironically, the most powerful evidence against the existence of Jesus is the writings of Josephus, which is what Christians hold up as being powerful evidence in favor of the existence of Jesus because he corroborates the existence of Jesus through uh, his writing, like independent corroboration. But when you really dig into it and you don't just cite it, but actually read it, then um, it tells a different story. Because whoever it is that wrote Josephus is the author of the New Testament. And Josephus was being his 7-volume work, War of the Jews, was issued by the Flavian emperors. He was an agent of the Flavians. Well, so today we are looking at only a tangential work to that whole hypothesis there, which is from Randel Helms, and this book is called Gospel Fictions, and he looks at some of the motivations of the evangelists, um, and you know points out that historical accuracy was not part of their vocabulary. They were shooting for doctrinal consistency and um, you know theological um, uprightness. What they each one of them considered to be what Jesus would have been like, or what they wanted him to be like. And so he goes through things like the baptism, and uh, shows that for example, Mark discusses the baptism, and but Matthew is embarrassed about it, because embarrassed about Mark's writing of it, because it implies that Jesus was a sinner. That's why he needed to be baptized, and that when he was baptized, the sky opened up, and God says, "This is my son," and that means that prior to that, he wasn't his son. And uh, Mark doesn't have a virgin birth story or an annunciation in his gospel. And so Matthew does. Matthew puts the virgin birth in at the beginning. And so Jesus is God from the start in Matthew. And so he doesn't need to be baptized. Um, and so Matthew has to work that into his script, because he's basically copying Mark, but he changes a few of the verses, and he changes that verse to make it say, when Jesus goes to be baptized, John says, "You don't need to be baptized by me. I need to be baptized by you. I'm not even worthy of lacing up your sandals," or whatever it is that he says. Um, Basically, as a disclaimer, like, and Jesus then says, "Oh, well, it's just a requirement. I know I don't need to be baptized by you, but we'll just go along with it." Um, so that is kind of what they get into. Now we're actually talking about the virgin birth, and um, one of the sticking points for Luke and Matthew is that they want to be able to cite these Old Testament prophecies, so-called prophecies, which are really just histories that are written in the Old Testament that the Christians have attempted to appropriate as being um, prophecies of Jesus, and one of them is, I think, Micah 5:2, and that is that somebody came from Bethlehem. And so they have to be able to try to work in the fact that, well, he was brought up in Nazareth, but he was born in Bethlehem. So how can we write a story that contains both of those things? And then they throw in the stuff about Herod the Great, who persecuted all the children, which is a borrowed story from many other different traditions as well, and then including the Indian tradition. And then that gives an excuse for Joseph and Mary and Jesus to go to Egypt and then come back. And they come back, and then in Mark or in Matthew, the the angel forgets to tell Matthew that, well, actually it's Herod's son that's in charge, so you still have to look out. So you still need to move somewhere else besides Bethlehem. You can't live in Bethlehem because um, Herod's son is still in charge, and he's going to kill you too. But what Matthew doesn't point out is that Herod's another Herod is in charge in Galilee too, where Nazareth is, and so uh, you know he doesn't explain that part. So now we're getting on to discussing how Luke deals with the problem. And it says, like Matthew, Luke faced the same problem of reconciling no Nazarene upbringing with supposed Bethlehem birth. His solution, however, was entirely different and even less convincing. Whereas Matthew has the Holy Family living in Bethlehem at the time of the birth and traveling later to Nazareth, Luke has them living in Nazareth and traveling to Bethlehem in the very last stages of Mary's pregnancy, which, um, you don't probably want to be riding on an ass when you're 9 months pregnant. Um, but, you know, I've never heard a Christian comment on that. In those days, a decree was issued by Emperor Augustus for a registration to be made throughout the Roman world. Uh, Not exactly at in those days. I guess that is a quote. This is coming from the book of Luke. Um, in those days, a decree was issued by the Emperor Augustus for a registration to be made throughout the Roman world. This was the first registration of its kind. It took place when Quirinius was governor of Syria. For this purpose, everyone made his way to his own town, and so Joseph went up to Judea from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to register at the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was of the house of David by descent, and with him went Mary, who was betrothed to him. There are so many problems with I that I can even see. I'm not an expert on this. Um, like he was of the house of David from 1,000 years before that. Um, so, uh, like they're going to have that traced back, and that he has to go all the way back to Bethlehem. Okay, she went with Mary, who was betrothed to him. She was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. And that's in Luke 2 1 through 6. Though Luke 1:5 dates the birth of Jesus in the days of Herod, king of Judea, who died in 4 BC, he wants the journey from Galilee to Bethlehem to have occurred in response to a census called when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And historians know um, the one and only census conducted while Quirinius was legate in Syria affected only Judea, not Galilee, and took place in AD 6 or 7. And so that was 10 years later. Um, so that's a problem. It's not a fatal problem, but it's a major problem. A good 10 years after the death of Herod, um, it is in his anxiety to relate the Galilean upbringing with the supposed Bethlehem birth, Luke confused his facts. Now, I would be interested. in knowing what the Romans were really thinking of when they wrote this. Um, because you would think that they would have gotten the facts right, or maybe they got them wrong on purpose. Because one of the major motivations for the Romans, not only as a psychological operation against the Jews, but they also wanted to um, humiliate and mock the Jews as well. So, it could be part of a joke, or, some type of satire. Um, but we'll look into that. So Luke confuses facts. Indeed, Luke's anxiety has involved him in some real absurdities, like the needless 90-mile journey of a woman in the last days of her pregnancy, uh, which is not a 90-mile journey by car, but by ass, or, donkey. For it was the Davidic Joseph who supposedly had to be registered uh, in the ancestral village, not the Levitical Mary. Worse yet, Luke has been forced to contrive a universal dislocation for a simple tax registration. Who could imagine the efficient Romans requiring millions in the empire to journey miles or hundreds of miles to the villages of millennium old ancestors merely to sign a tax form? Needless to say, no such event ever happened in the history of the Roman Empire. But Micah 5 too must be fulfilled. Such thinking underlies Luke's narrative as much as it does Matthew's. She was expecting a child, and while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born, and she gave birth to a son, her firstborn. She wrapped him in his swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them to lodge in the house. Um, Matthew 2:6. Luke 2:6. Luke's community, like Matthew's, scoured the Old Testament for references that could be interpreted as predictions of Jesus. The manger was found in Isaiah 1:3 of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The ox knows its owner, and the ass his master's manger. But Israel does not know me, and the people has not regarded me. Uh, yeah, so if you think that that is a prophecy about Jesus, then you are mentally ill. Because that was written, 700 years before the birth of Jesus. And I'm sorry, but that was written in a completely different context and has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus. But these mentally ill Christians, what really these Romans, dug that out. Um, they might have even interpolated it, but it is a huge stretch. Let me read that again. The ox knows its owner, and the ass his master's manger. But Israel does not know me, and the people has not regarded me. I mean, yeah, if you use a shoehorn, you could argue that that's about Jesus. But then when you recognize that it has a context, and that it was written 700 years before. Um, that's just a stretch. Now, Bethlehem had no room for its Savior, and Israel did not know him. Only the lowly ox and ass first saw his glory, but it was a kingly role granted him from the first. For though Luke has no magi or gifts, as does Matthew's legend, he relates Jesus through swaddling to Solomon himself, who wrote according to the apocryphal book of wisdom, which is in the Septuagint 7, 3, and 4. That when I was born, I was nursed in swaddling clothes, and that with care. For there is no other king that had any other beginning of birth. Swaddled and placed in a manger, Jesus now fulfills these predictions. That a manger or sheep crib was the proper place for the new prince of Israel to be laid, Luke felt certain. For had not the Lord said to David, I took thee from the stables of the sheep, that thou shouldest be a prince over my people, over Israel. And that is 2 Samuel uh, which I maybe this is it says 2 Kings 7:8 in the Septuagint, so I'm not sure um, if that's a mistranslation or what it is. But thus, for Luke, the circumstances and place of Jesus' birth. Hold on here. Um, okay, sorry. Okay, thus for Luke, the circumstances and place of Jesus' birth were not mere historical accidents, they were part of the prophetic sign of his royalty. As the angel says to the shepherds, today in the city of David, a deliverer has been born to you, Christ the Lord. And this is a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in his swaddling clothes in a manger. And that's a huge stretch. Um, and I guess that is the end of the chapter. So we will stop right there. Um, let's see here. Where are we headed for the next chapter? Um, let's see here. Yeah, so the next chapter is on miracles, part one, the synoptic narratives, and then we'll cover the miracles that are in John after that. So um, we will um, get on with this when we return tomorrow. But for now, thanks for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe, comment, contribute, and come back tomorrow for another episode of Bible Decode. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.